Hello, welcome, and a very good day. My name is Abhilash, and I am from the AD Solutions team here at Manage Engine, and I will be your presenter for today. Now, before we go ahead and jump in, I would like to thank you all for joining in. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you for being a part of this webinar. Before we jump in, I hope all of you are safe. I understand that this is the pandemic and these are unfortunate times, and I hope all of you are indoors and healthy and safe. All right. So yes, the topic for today is identity and access management, a prerequisite for cybersecurity. Now, why did I choose to speak about this topic today? Why are we talking about identity and access management, and why are we considering that to be a prerequisite for cybersecurity, or to be or to play an important role or a function in cybersecurity or IT security of organizations such as yours? Right now, whenever I utter the term cybersecurity or IT security, the first thing that comes to mind is network perimeter security. Right? We think about firewalls, we think about the network perimeter, we think about our servers that are facing the public, that are facing the internet, we think about DDoS attacks, the list simply goes on. Right? So whenever I speak about cybersecurity or IT security, first thing that comes to mind is network perimeter security. And while that is important, while network perimeter security is irreplaceable and is absolutely important for security, especially now since we're all working from home, we must also understand that there is an alarming need of access and identity security. Right? We can build the security along our network perimeters how much ever we want. We can add, we can secure our infrastructure along the perimeter how much ever we want. But if we do not secure our internal users, our end users, and the access they have to resources like your applications or data, cybersecurity is still not complete. The lack of permission management allows users to have access to applications, to data that they do not actually need, making room for improper access, making room for privilege escalation, making room for access abuse, and thereby giving a rise to security incidents. Right? Here's a simple example. Let's say one of your users, your end users that you do not have an idea about, has administrative access or has domain admin access or has access to, let's say, a privileged file server. An attacker who potentially is able to compromise this non-privileged user's account will be able to access your sensitive data stored in the file server. Right? My point here is, if your end users are not secured, if the access that your users have is not controlled, breaches spread faster, and that can also lead to a security incident. Right? So identity and access management is a discipline that ensures that the right people have access to the right resources in your organization at the right time. Right, so let's take a look at today's agenda and let's see what's in store for us. We will be taking a look at various IAM aspects of hybrid Active Directory, namely Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, and we will see how AD360, our integrated IAM solution, can be of help. Right, so first up, we're going to start off with the IT landscape. Now, this is 2020. The IT landscape is not like what it used to be before. Let's learn about the shift and let's see what's new, and let's see how we need to redesign and re-engineer our IAM strategy to suit this particular new IT landscape that most organizations are adopting. Right? We'll take a look at the focus shift, like I said, from perimeter security to inside the network. We'll take a look at the important parts or the functionalities of an IAM solution. And finally, we'll take a look at how Manage Engine AD360 can be used to enforce a secure IAM model. All right. So the shift in the IT landscape, like I said, it's not just on-premise Active Directory anymore. Most organizations are now adopting public cloud services alongside traditional on-premises infrastructures. So this diagram says it all. If you take a look at it, Windows Server Active Directory runs on one end, right? But the organization uses a fair amount of Azure Active Directory or Office 365 or connected applications. Customers and partners equally use both of these resources, both located on premises and located in the public cloud infrastructure. Right. Now, enforcing identity and access control for on-premises infrastructures like Active Directory was a problem to begin with, but now the problem is gradually expanding because organizations like yours have started to adopt public cloud services. So the need for identity security and the need for access control and permission management is now more than ever. Right? So like I said, this is a long existing problem in most IT infrastructures. The focus is always on the perimeter, right? Firewalls, internet facing servers, network devices like routers or switches that are external to the, that are basically internet facing. So what we end up doing is we spend a lot of time trying to improve this security, but little do we know that the attacker is interested only in your users, right? The prime focus of any attacker, it could be an internal attacker or it could be an external attacker, is to compromise an account with the highest privileges in the lowest time possible, right? So that is the anatomy of any IT attack. The first thing an attacker does is he or she tries to compromise an account. And once he or she does that, the next step is to leverage the access that that particular account has. And once all the access is leveraged, the next immediate step is to try and look for an account that is higher up in the network hierarchy, right? Try and look for an account that has more privileges than the existing compromised account. So we need to secure our users. We need to secure our users internally. We need to ensure that our users have access to the right resources. We need to ensure that our user credentials are not leaked. We need to ensure that our endpoints are secure. And for that, we need an efficient identity and access management solution. Right? Now, let me back this up with a few attacks that have happened in 2020. I'm pretty sure you would have heard of the recent Twitter breach that compromised accounts of many, many celebrity users such as Elon Musk or Apple or Samsung, and they were able to tweet cryptocurrency scams from these accounts. The reason these particular attacks happened was because of improper identity and access management. If not the only core reason, identity and access management played a crucial role in all of these attacks. For example, Twitter was speculated to have broad access to a privileged server. If I break it down, the internal employees of Twitter had broad access, had liberal access to an administrative server. All the attacker had to do was to compromise a user or trick a user into giving out the credentials to the internal privileged server. And that's it. That led to the Twitter breach, right? Honda and NL group of companies were breached because they were subject to a snake ransomware attack. And the reason that happened was because the RDP credentials of end users or endpoint machines were not used securely. Users probably used these credentials on a public Wi-Fi. Someone somehow got access to the user credentials. A recent breach on a famous Japanese telecommunications company called NTT happened because an endpoint was compromised, and eventually an attacker was able to gain access to a cloud server from the endpoint, and then from there to an internal server that was in close contact to the domain controller, and eventually to the Active Directory domain controller. My point here is all of these organizations like Twitter or Honda or NTT probably had strong IT security, probably had strong network perimeter security, right? But where they failed was in securing their internal users and the access they have. And that's how breaches happen, ladies and gentlemen, because an attacker compromises a user account and then tries to escalate privileges to a user that is higher up in the network hierarchy. So if your internal users and if their access is not controlled, two things may happen. The first thing is breaches will spread faster because once an attacker discovers that one of your user account has permissions that he or she was not supposed to have, the attacker will leverage those permissions to gain deeper access into your network, right? Another reason that this a weak IAM foundation can do is basically be the root cause for security breaches, right? The Honda example that you see in front of you or the NTT breach example are both classics of weak identity and access management, right? The most latest attack that we were looking into is the zero logon vulnerability. And this happened because attackers discovered a flaw within Active Directory infrastructures, a flaw that basically allows attackers to exploit the net logon authentication protocol. Now, this is a protocol that client systems in an Active Directory infrastructure use to authenticate themselves to a domain controller, right? So there was a flaw within the AES encryption mechanism of the net logon authentication protocol. And this is basically the handshake process that you see in front of you, where a client system authenticates itself to a domain controller. And what attackers found out that this is a challenge and response mechanism, the handshake process that you see right here, right? So attackers were eventually able to send null values as a challenge and eventually use a null password or an empty password from a client machine to become authenticated in Active Directory, right? I would encourage you to patch this flaw as soon as possible. It is hyperlinked right here. Just click on the patch that you see on your screen and you can patch it right away. All right, so again, my point here is we spend a lot of time on network security. We spend a lot of time trying to protect our end devices, our devices that are internet facing, our firewalls. The list simply goes on. But my point is your end users' access must be secure, right? Because that is how most breaches spread faster, or they can even be the root cause of most security breaches, right? This is basically a functionality of an IAM solution, a basic functionality of IAM solution. The first thing that your users do when they log on to a domain join system is identify themselves and authenticate themselves, right? This happens typically via logins and passwords. It could be a login in Active Directory. It could be a login across Azure Active Directory or Office 365, or it could be a login across any custom cloud application, right? Once a user logs in, he or she will have to authorize access. So authorization is basically the access that your users are allowed to have, which resource a particular user can access, basically, right? And once authorization is done, the last part of an IAM solution is accountability. Now, what do I mean by this? Once users authenticate themselves, once users are authorized to access the resource, are all of these accesses noted? Are all of these accesses basically monitored or tracked or checked upon, right? Now, I don't want to complicate this further. Let's take a look at 3 fundamental questions that potentially impact an IAM strategy of any organization. Now, you could be thinking of buying an IAM solution. You could be thinking of implementing a new strategy or building your own solution. And for starters, these are the 3 fundamental questions that I would like for you to ask yourself, right? The first and the foremost important thing and the most ignored thing in most organizations is access governance. I'm not talking about permission modification. I'm not talking about access modification during a user's lifetime, but I'm talking about the initial access. How is the initial access granted to users? Are there sufficient processes in place so the initial access granted is secure? Are there proper systems in place so the initial access granted to users is checked by multiple authorized users to ensure that it's secure? Right? So onboarding and offboarding is crucial in most organizations because users have to be onboarded, have to be brought into the organization in a secure manner. And once they are done, once their lifespan is complete, they have to be offboarded. They have to be purged completely and properly, right? This is the core of any IAM solution. And like I said, the IT landscape is shifting. So we need an IAM solution that caters to your hybrid IT infrastructure. That is a combination of on-premises infrastructure and public cloud infrastructures like Azure Active Directory, right? So when it comes to onboarding, this is what we've got, right? Now I'm going to take the example of Active Directory because I'm pretty sure most of you use Active Directory as an on-premises solution, and most of you are gradually looking at Azure or Office 365 for external assistance, for more help into managing your user identities and the access to the resources. So let's just take a look at a simple onboarding task in Active Directory. Right now, do you recognize this? I'm pretty sure you would have worked with this. I'm pretty sure most of you would have worked with this particular tool called the ADUC tool. Right. So what you do is when your HR calls you up as a system administrator or as a help desk and asks you to create, let's say, 100 users, you go new and then you hit create a new user. And once you create a user, the next immediate thing you do is you specify the properties of each user. Right? Every attribute, every level of access your user has will be specified right here. Right? And why is this process exactly painful? Because there is no way using the GUI tools or using the ADUC tool that you just saw to create bulk users quickly. Right now, let's say you got a call from your HR today and you were asked to onboard, let's say 10 interns in your organization. Right? Not a big number, 10 people joining in, 10 interns is definitely not a big number. And what you end up doing is you open up the ADUC tool and then you create a new user and you'll have to repeat the process for each user. And the problem complicates when you have to create cloud accounts for these users as well. So these users may need accounts in Office 365 or even Azure Active Directory. Right? Another mistake that I've noticed most often is that most administrators or help desk technicians, including myself, end up copying user accounts. So if there is a similar user account to be created, what we do is we hit copy and we create a new user account off of the older user account, right? But little do we know that this particular user account has access that the newer user account is not supposed to have. Right? So that's the problem with using the native tools. The problem with using the native graphical user interface or GUI tools is that it is very repetitive. There is no easy way for you to create bulk users and specify all their properties. And when it comes to cloud creation, the native tools do not help you with that. Right? So let me quickly head back down. So yes. When it comes to cloud solutions, the native tools do not help you with that. So let's say you have to create a few on-premises Exchange mailboxes for your users. Let's say you need to create an account in Office 365 for your user as well. What happens then? You'll have to shuffle between multiple tools, right? And it's never the case that users, whenever they're onboarded, have the same properties. So this just adds on more work for an administrator or a help desk technician, because he or she will have to toggle between multiple tools, specify various properties, and the problem that on-premises serves only to on-premises and cloud tools serve only to the cloud makes this onboarding process more and more complex. Right? So this is when we use our command line tools like PowerShell or command prompt. This is when these tools come in. But the problem with this is you'll have to manually specify every attribute that you wish to create for your users. For example, this is a simple onboarding process in Active Directory, and a similar process ensues for Azure Active Directory as well, right? And when we do that, we'll have to specify each attribute for every user account. You'll have to manually give in the names. So what's the prerequisite here is that you need to know scripting. Right, so command shell knowledge is a must-have if you have to onboard users in Active Directory or Azure or Office 365. The problem with command line knowledge is that it's not intuitive, it's not easy for you to understand or learn, and the second problem is that there are no ready-made scripts. Now you might tell me, hey, if I need to create a user, I'm simply going to Google a PowerShell script and I am going to use it. Right? But my point here is that yes, you could Google PowerShell scripts, you could download it and you could run it. But the problem with PowerShell scripts is that they are not catered to your organization specific needs. Let's say you have a specific user account with a specific group membership, with a specific license in Office 365, with a specific group membership within Office 365 and on-premises Active Directory, with specific password values, right? You cannot specify such details using scripts. Now, of course, you can, but then it involves a lot of time, it's complex, and there is no way you will find such scripts ready-made on the internet. It takes an average of 30 to 40 minutes for you to find out a script that serves exactly what you need, right? And last but not the least, scripts are slowly getting malicious. Symantec states that 95% of PowerShell scripts out there are malicious. So PowerShell scripts may introduce malware into your organization, may introduce unwarranted changes that you may not be aware of, right? So this is when our solution AD360, our integrated IAM solution, comes into the picture, and this is how it can help, right? So let me quickly show you what I mean by that. So this is AD360. AD360 gives you a complete IAM solution for your entire organization. So if user creation is your problem in Active Directory, we can help you with that, right? If user access modification is your problem, we can help you with that. If you need something that basically helps you understand what privileges your user accounts have, what permissions your existing users have on your domain, AD360 can help you with that. If user passwords are more of your concern, AD360 can help you with that as well, right? So the capabilities of AD360 are endless, and today we will be looking at 3 important modules of AD360, right? So first up, we were on onboarding. So let's take a look at AD Manager Plus. So let me quickly show that to you. So AD Manager Plus is basically your hybrid Active Directory management and reporting solution. So hybrid Active Directory in this case typically means Active Directory and Office 365, right? Because this is an infrastructure that most organizations are adopting. So we were talking about user onboarding, right? So with AD Manager Plus, what you can do is you can create something called templates. And this is how templates work, right? So you can see that I've got a template created here called hybrid user creation. And I'm going to open that up. So what you do here is you specify all the properties that your user accounts need, right? You can set the password, you can set the group membership, you can set when the account expires, you can set which computers your user can log on to, you can enable certain password flags, and the list simply doesn't end there. If you have cloud infrastructures like Office 365, you can specify certain values in Office 365 as well, right? So what do I mean by this? The next time you have to create users, when you have to bulk create users, and it has to be secure, of course, what you do is you pre-create a template the previous day or the previous night. And once you have the template ready, all you got to do is click on create a new single user. And you could use the template that you pre-created, and you could use that to onboard users across Active Directory and across Office 365. Right? And if you have to create bulk users, all you got to do is click on create bulk users, simply import a CSV file with a list of usernames, just the names, nothing more, because everything else you specified in the template. All right, so that's the beauty of AD360. What it can help you with is that it helps you predefine properties. So let's say you need to frequently onboard interns belonging to different teams. They could be interns of the marketing team. They could be interns of your coding team. They could be interns of your design team. So you could have 3 separate templates, and you could leverage these templates instantly to bulk onboard users whenever they join your organization. And this process is extremely secure because you have predefined properties. You're not copying it off other users. You are not using scripting. You're not using complex PowerShell scripts. All you're doing is leveraging a friendly GUI to basically onboard users in a secure manner. Right? AD360 can automate the entire process as well. So what AD360 can do is it basically can automate your entire user creation process across your hybrid Active Directory environment. For example, let me show you something here. I'm going to call this hybrid user creation, right? And all I'm going to do here is select user automation. I'm going to select a task called create users. Here I have a CSV file with a list of usernames. I'm going to select a template, which is going to be hybrid user creation. And once I hit save at a particular time and date, this automation will automatically run. And every time it runs, you as an administrator or a help desk will be notified via email and via SMS. All right. So the task of onboarding can be done securely with templates, and you do not have to involve yourself with it. You can automate the entire process, let it run at its own pace, and at the same time, you can be notified. So you're never left out of the loop. All right. And yes, another important aspect of identity onboarding is identity offboarding or user identity deprovisioning, like we call it. And it's important that you have a proper deprovisioning process in place, because still many inactive user accounts or unnecessary group memberships or inactive Office 365 accounts or mailboxes are impacting security, are impacting the judicial and the optimal usage of resources. For example, like your Office 365 licenses in organizations. So purging of a user or offboarding a user is also a crucial aspect of any IAM solution, and AD 360 can help you with that as well, because AD 360 has something called delete or disable policies. Right? So whenever your users are deleted, you can specify certain things to happen, right? For example, delete their remote home folders, delete their profile, export their mailbox to a share, right? Delete their cloud accounts. The list simply goes on. So we've got delete policies separate, we've got disabled policies separate for your domain. So every time your users are disabled or deleted, you can have a slew of actions, a slew of pre-configured tasks to run automatically. All right, so that's the first part covered. What we just saw is secure user onboarding and secure user offboarding, which is crucial for any IAM solution, because it's when users are onboarded that they may be given access to resources that they may not need. Right? But using AD 360, you can have a strong system in place just for the onboarding and offboarding process. You can have the onboarding and offboarding process go through multiple people as well, right? So for instance, when you onboard users across Active Directory or Office 365, you can let it go through multiple people, right? For example, the reviewer will review the user creation or the user deletion, approver approves it, and finally the executor will execute the action. Executor basically has the final say in things. All right. Now, the next important part of any IAM solution is authentication, or basically double checking a user who is authenticating himself or herself across applications. Right now, I do see a few questions coming in. Please bear with me. I will be getting back to you really soon, probably in the next 10 to 20 minutes. Right? So yes, user authentication is an important part of an IAM, and the problem with identification and authentication in hybrid Active Directory is that the password policies are weak. Right? What comes to mind when I say authentication? Logons. What comes to mind when I say logons? User passwords. Right? So for example, if you take a look at Active Directory's password policy, you can see that these are the 6 settings that basically determine the strength of passwords in your organization. And the problem with these 6 settings is that they are supremely outdated. They were introduced in 2000, I believe. That's more than 15 years of using the same password settings to ensure password security in your organization, to ensure the creation and the management of passwords in your organization, and they haven't gone a single change. Now, why do I say the Active Directory's password policy is weak? Let me show you a really simple example right here. All right, so I'm just going to head on to my VM. I'm going to minimize this. You see, I have a script here called domain password spray, right? So here's how the script's going to work. So I'm just going to close this, open up PowerShell. Okay, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to shift to the desktop, and I'm going to import the script that I just showed you. All right, looks like there was a typo here. Here we go. And I'm going to hit import module /domain password spray.ps1. The script is imported, and I'm going to do an invoke domain password spray, and I'm going to spray a very commonly used but still widely used passwords in most organizations, and that's password at 123, right? I hit enter, and here's what's going to happen. I hit confirm, and within a few seconds, we have a bunch of user accounts and their weak used passwords like password at 123. Right? Now, the point I'm trying to put forth here is that a non-privileged user was able to execute this particular attack. Right? And it's something that has to be looked into. Now, you might argue, you might say that Active Directory's passwords, weak passwords are used in organizations because users create weak passwords. So it's the end user's fault. My point here being, if your password policy is strong, if your password policy does not allow your users to get away with weak passwords, then there will be no weak passwords in your organization, right? So my point here is weak passwords stem from weak policies, strong passwords stem from strong password policies. So like I said, the Active Directory's password policy is old, it's outdated, and users can get away with weak passwords by relying on these 6 settings, right? If we jump into Azure Active Directory password protection, this is Azure Active Directory's way of ensuring secure password policies in your organization. It does have its own list of limitations, right? You'll need a premium license, which costs anywhere between $6 to $9 per month. And you'll need all your domain controllers to be running 2012 R2, nothing less for this particular process to work. Azure AD Password Protection, just like Active Directory Password Protection, is one size fits all, meaning you cannot have separate granular password policies for your privileged users, for your admin users, or for your users with access to sensitive resources. Basically, password policies is a one size fits all, both in Active Directory and in Azure Active Directory. And more importantly, the algorithm of Azure Active Directory is supremely flawed. Now, the reason I say that is because of this. Azure AD's password calculation algorithm is based on points, right? So every unique character gets a point and every banned password gets a point. And if the total is 5 or more than 5, the password will be accepted. And if the total is less than 5, the password will be rejected, right? So here's the problem with it. Contoso and blank are weak passwords, so that's 2 points. 1 and 2 are unique characters, so that's 2 points. Total is 4, password reject, right? But if we simply add another character, an exclamation mark in this case, that's 2 points for 2 weak passwords, and 3 points, as you can see, for 3 unique characters is equal to 5, password accepted, right? So Azure Active Directory's password protection has its own set of problems. It needs updated software, it needs expensive licenses, it's not granular on your organization, and the core, the algorithm of Azure AD password protection is not up to the standard, right? So your users can still get away with passwords like password at 123 or QWERTY at 123 or admin at 123, just like Active Directory's password policy. So how do we fix this problem? We need a uniform, a single, a centralized password policy for all your applications. Now, this is where a component of AD 360, namely AD Self-Service Plus, comes in, where AD Self-Service Plus can enforce a password policy that is granular for your admin users, for your privileged users, for your end users across your applications, right? So all you got to do is head into configuration, and you can see something called a policy configuration here. Now, AD Self-Service Plus works on the basis of policies. Policies can be applied on the basis of OUs, groups, or individual users. And once you head into Password Policy Enforcer, this is where you can enforce a custom password policy. Right now, if you can recollect, we had created a policy earlier based on OUs, groups, and individual users, and the password policy that you're trying to enforce here applies on the policy that we just created up above, right? So this policy is extremely granular. So if your domain admins need a stronger password policy, if your enterprise admins need a stronger password policy, if your users with access to sensitive applications or files or folders need a stronger password policy, you can apply that with AD Self-Service Plus, right? And these settings are up to the mark because they will not allow your users to get away with weak passwords. For example, check this out. If I type in password at 123 here, this is what happens. The password at 123, whenever used by my users, will be blocked in the organization, right? You can restrict repetition of characters from an older username, from an older password. You can set the number of uppercase, lowercase characters to use. You can set the number of special characters to use. You can set the minimum and the maximum length, and the list simply goes on. Right? So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to enforce a password policy that is in accordance with today's cybersecurity requirements. Right? Now note that I've said that this is an upgraded password policy for hybrid Active Directory. But as we saw it, this can only apply to your Active Directory users, right? Where does hybrid Active Directory come into the picture? How do we secure logons across applications like Azure or Office 365 or Google Cloud, or the list simply goes on, right? That's when single sign-on comes into the picture. So if I head into application right here, here is where you will be able to configure single sign-on in AD Self-Service Plus, right? For example, let's see if I find the Office 365 application here. Here we go. And this is where you can configure single sign-on. And again, single sign-on works on the basis of policies that are granular, can be applied based on OUs, groups, or individual users. So this is how it's basically going to work, right? Once you configure single sign-on in AD Self-Service Plus, the policy that you've applied here will enforce itself across all modes of logons. Now, how do I say that? Let me show you a simple video right here. So I'm just going to head on to my documents right here. I apologize. I thought I had left this open, and here we go. This is how it's going to work, right? A user basically logs on to his or her endpoint, and he or she, let's say, wants to log on to Office 365, right? And when he or she logs on to Office 365, the logon is redirected to AD Self-Service Plus, and AD Self-Service Plus will then authenticate and authorize the user's access to that application onto which he or she is trying to log on to. Right? So this way, the user will not have to enter a password another time. So what have we done here? We've enforced a single password policy at Active Directory logon, and we brought the numerous logons in cloud environments, right? Across Azure, across Office 365, across Google Suite, across Slack, if you do use Slack in your organization. We brought all of these logons to just one single logon, and that's Active Directory's logon with the help of single sign-on in AD Self-Service Plus. Right? So that's how I say it's a single password policy for all your logons, because what we've done here is we brought all the logons to just one single logon, right? And that's Active Directory logon, right? The core of an IAM solution and the trend that is impacting IAM solutions these days is multi-factor authentication, a crucial part of authentication or password security, and AD Self-Service Plus can help you with that as well. So if I head into AD Self-Service Plus, we've got multi-factor authentication here, and this is where you can enforce multi-factor authentication for your user logons. And again, this is granular because you can apply any MFA process you want for your users based on their privilege or based on their nature. For example, if your older users prefer an email or SMS-based authentication, you can have that set up. If you're younger, more tech-savvy users expect, let's say, an authenticator application for multi-factor authentication, you can set that up as well. So this is how it's going to work, right? So I have a particular multi-factor authentication method that I just set up yesterday. So when I log on, so as you can see, I'm logging on to my domain and I'm entering a password, which is governed by the AD Self-Service Plus's custom password policy. Once I log on and hit enter, the multi-factor authentication process kicks in, right? So this is where, as an end user, I'll have to double check my identity. I'll have to verify my identity for a second time. And once I verify my identity, I will be able to log on to my domain. And because we've enforced single sign-on, that's all I need to do, right? So my point here is one-time password, one-time multi-factor authentication, and that's all your users need to do in a hybrid IT environment. They do not need to log on another time. They do not need to enter a password another time for any other cloud application. It's just one logon with a password and one-time multi-factor authentication. Right? So this is when AD Self-Service Plus can help, because it helps you to enforce security for authentication, which is passwords, and of course with multi-factor authentication and single sign-on, thereby improving security, establishing a central point for security, that's your Active Directory logons, and also basically easing your users process, enhancing your users experience, because your users now needn't remember multiple passwords to log on to multiple applications. All right, now AD Self-Service Plus works on the basis of conditional access policies as well. So if you want to deploy the password policies or multi-factor authentication based on an IP range or based on a particular device or based on business hours, you can granularly apply those settings as well if you want to. All right. AD Self-Service Plus just does not end with password security. It can do a lot more. For example, you can enforce AD Self-Service Plus, so your users can use AD Self-Service Plus to self-reset their passwords, to unlock their own accounts, or to change their passwords. AD Self-Service Plus integrates with Have I Been Pawned. Now, I'm pretty sure you would have heard of this. Have I Been Pawned is basically let me quickly show that to you. Is basically a password checking website. This is a research site, if I may, where it will check if you have ever used exposed passwords. Now, breaches happen, passwords get exposed in the breaches, and this particular tool right here will help you find out if you are using passwords that were previously exposed or leaked in breaches. And the beauty of AD Self-Service Plus is that it can integrate with that as well. Right? So with AD 360, you can ensure identification and authentication, basically the logon process as well. All right, now it's also important that we look into how accesses are modified. So all we've done so far is we've secured onboarding, we've secured offboarding, we've secured authentication in organizations across applications. It's also important to watch how accesses are changed, right? Because in a user's lifespan, accesses are changed, modified very often based on a user's needs. Now, these changes could be authorized, these changes could be unauthorized, these changes could be temporary, or these changes could be temporary, but they weren't revoked later, but they weren't removed later, right? So it's important that you look into access modification. But when we talk about access modification, the GUI tools of Active Directory or Azure again come into the picture. Right? Here's a simple example. Let's say you have a bunch of file folders and your users have inherited access through a nested folder structure, right? How quickly can you determine these permissions? So nested folders in each other, users have inherited access, read access, write access, modify access, anything it could be. And how quickly can you determine that using the GUI tools? The only way you can do that is by checking the security tab of each file or folder, right? The same problem applies to your Active Directory permissions as well. So if I head on to my VM right here, open up my ADUC tool, and let's say I want to find out which of my users have permissions over all the OUs that you see right here. How would I do that? I'll have to right click on the OU, I'll have to check properties, head into security, and read and manually find out what permission which of my user accounts have. Right? This is a very manual process, a repetitive process, just like onboarding when it comes to Active Directory, but AD 360 can help you with that as well. Right? So let me quickly run through all the features of AD 360 and how you could potentially discover permissions. If I head into reports, you can find out a number of permissions about Active Directory. Right? For example, here we go, users and groups. This will show you all users and their group memberships. Right? Now, why is this important? Is because organizations often make mistakes such as this when it comes to group memberships. Group memberships are not always direct. They can be nested, and via nested privileges, a user may receive administrative or privileged access to a particular resource. And there are certain groups from applications like Exchange that may end up giving your users more access than they actually need, right? The Exchange Windows Permissions group that you see right here will give your users complete access on your domain node, right? And what does the domain node do? It applies permissions to all the objects under it. So your user with right permission on this particular security descriptor of the domain DNS node will allow your users to have access more than what they need, right? For example, they can change the domain lockout policies right here, password and lockout policies right here. So group memberships often end up giving your users more access than they really need. It could be nested group memberships. It could be direct group memberships. It could be group memberships via other platforms like Exchange or Office 365. It could be cross-domain group memberships as well if you have multiple domains in your organization. So this is when AD 360 can come in, because AD 360 can read through the group memberships, right? Help you find out nested or indirect or direct group memberships and fix the issue as soon as you find it, right? So you could delete a user account, you could disable a user account, and you could remove the user account from the group. Similarly, if I head into password reports right here, this will help you find out which of your users have password never expires, which of your users have soon to expire passwords, which of your users haven't changed their passwords in a long time. Coming down, we've got something called NTFS reports, and AD 360 can help you find out permissions across your files or folders just with a few clicks. All you got to do is specify the accounts you would like to check the permissions for, specify the folder and which server you would like to check the permissions from, specify the subfolder level, specify an access type if you're trying to check for the particular access type, and once you hit generate, you have the information right in front of you. Similarly, we've got something called security reports that will help you understand the permissions that your users have across your Active Directory security object. So if I head into search permissions right here, all you got to do is specify an object. Let's say I have a container right here, so I could specify the object. I could specify a username, to specify any permission that I would like to search for on my domain, and all of that will be produced in the form of a report, right? And my point here is most of these reports are actionable. So it's just not discovery, but you can fix problems as soon as you discover them using the built-in actions within the reports, right? This is just with regard to Active Directory, but if I head into the Office 365 tab, there are a bunch of actions you can look into in Office 365 as well, right? For example, your Office 365 group memberships. Which of your users have licenses within Office 365? Which of your users have permissions on certain mailboxes within Office 365, right? Which of your users have multi-factor authentication disabled? Which of your users' passwords are going to expire really soon? So there's a lot you can look into just by using the reports tab within AD Manager Plus component of AD 360, and you can determine permissions that your users have across Active Directory, across Azure and Office 365 as well, right? If you need a more deeper help into Azure or a more deeper look into Azure-based permissions, we've got another component of AD 360 called Office 365 Manager Plus that will help you understand what permissions your user have, the deeper permissions across Azure Active Directory, right? For example, if I head into security reports right here, you will be able to find out who are the admins in Azure, or who are the admins in your Exchange environment, right? If I head into user reports right here, you can find out which are the devices registered in Azure Active Directory, what are the owners of the particular devices, password status, right? The list simply goes on, and AD 360 can help you with that, because AD 360 will help you to basically unravel or reveal the permissions your users actually have, something that's extremely difficult to determine if you use the native GUI tools like the ADUC tool or the Azure Active Directory portal, or if you use scripts like PowerShell or command prompt even, right? So AD 360 will help you to gain visibility on the permissions. And once you understand what your permissions are, you can also fix them with the built-in management actions that come in with your reports, right? So let me quickly show you something right here. If I head on to my AD Manager Plus component, head into management, we've got something called file server management right here, right? So this will basically help you manage permissions across your file servers, right? So you can select the folders, you can select permissions that you wish to apply, and all you got to do is hit modify, and they will be modified across your files and folders. And with AD 360, there's always something extra. So if you take a look at this permission right here, what it does is it removes all existing permissions on a folder, and it will apply the permissions that you've specified right here. If you already have a folder with secure permissions, you can copy those permissions from that folder. You can copy the ACLs or ACEs, and you can let it apply to this particular folder, right? So not just understanding what your permissions are, AD 360 will also help you determine, will also help you fix the permission vulnerabilities once you find them, right? For example, here you see something called group attributes, right? You can manage all your users' group memberships right here. You can add a bunch of users to a group. You can clear their group memberships. You can import a file of usernames. The list simply goes on, and AD 360 can help you with that. With AD 360, you can delegate tasks to your end users in a secure manner, right? So as you can see, I have my HR manager right here, and I've delegated my HR manager certain work, certain roles, like let's say creating users, modifying the group memberships, and we could delegate certain roles in Office 365 right here. And the best part is all the roles, all the delegation that happens within AD 360 is always documented, right? So once I head into help desk roles, and let's say I create a new role, and let's say I want my users to basically create other users, reset their passwords, or add them to a group, right? If I head into Office 365 right here, I can specify certain Office 365 actions as well. And every action that we've specified right here will be created under a role, which then can be applied to a technician who's no one but an Active Directory user. And these roles that are granted to your users via AD 360 are always recorded, right? There's a report that basically records every role that is granted to your end users, and every activity that is performed by your delegated help desk technicians within AD 360 will be audited as well, right? So general report documenting all roles that were granted, and an audit report documenting all activities that were performed by your technicians, both of which native tools cannot do, right? If I have to find out what roles my end users have in native Active Directory, the only way to do that is right click, head into properties, check security, and find out if a particular user has been delegated a privileged role here. That's the only way we can do it, right? How do I find out what actions my users are performing? I'll have to look into the event logs again, which is a different ball game altogether. Right? You can basically have a workflow in process, like I said, for sensitive actions. For example, let me quickly show that to you. If I head into workflow right here, you can have a workflow for all sensitive actions like user creation or password resets, users getting unlocked, users being added to certain groups. So activities such as this can go through multiple authorized people, and only when they approve will the activity be carried out, right? If I head into add to group right here, you'll see something called a duration. So you can make permission changes or access modifications on your domain based on a particular duration as well, right? For example, I raise a request for a particular user account to be added to a group only for 30 minutes, right? The duration is 30 minutes, goes through multiple people, and when they approve it, the user will be added to the group, but within 30 minutes, the permission will be revoked automatically again. We've also got something called folder permissions, which can be set based on a particular time as well. All right, so that's another important aspect of AD 360 because it can help you set time-bound permissions. So you can securely delegate permissions with workflow, with templates. The choice is up to you, and you can set these permissions to basically unrevoke themselves or ungrant themselves after a particular time period with AD 360, right? Last but not the least, we need a proper monitoring system in place. Now your users day in, day out log on to the systems. They access resources in your organization. They modify resources in your organization. They are modified upon, like another user or an admin or a help desk may give another user access to a particular resource, right? So there are activities performed on objects. There are activities performed by objects on other objects, and changes such as that must be brought to notice, and AD360 can help you with that as well. Because AD360 can basically monitor access modifications across your Active Directory, Azure, member servers, workstations, data storage devices like Windows file servers, NetApp, EMC, the list simply goes on, right? How is this exactly helpful? Is because the native tools are not up to the mark again, right? Your Active Directory records events in the event queue. Your Azure Active Directory records events in the audit log. So if you have to correlate actions that have happened in Active Directory and Azure Active Directory and find out something suspicious, find out a sensitive change, you cannot do so, right? So there's no hybrid auditing support just from a single screen. Again, the age-old problem that came in with creation or modification, you'll have to jump between multiple glasses, right? There are a large volume of logs that are recorded within Active Directory, within Azure as well. These logs are retained only for a less amount of time. You cannot filter these logs to find out anything malicious that's happening. For example, if I open up my event viewer right here, right, this is the event viewer for my workstation machine, right? And let's say I want to find out which of the accounts have logged on to my workstation, right? So what I do is I head into the security tab, I click on filter current log, and let's say I call the filter to be event ID 4624, because 4624 is potentially a logon activity event recorded with an Active Directory, right? Now, as you can see, the sheer number of events, the tool is already lagging, right? Let's see if my domain controller has this tool open, and here we go. Right? So if I just have to monitor which of my user accounts have logged on to my domain controller, I'll have to right click, click on filter current log, and here is where I specify the filter, right? So I'm just going to say event ID 4624, hit OK, and you can see the sheer number of logon events on my domain controller, and only I'm the owner of this domain controller, right? You can see that there are amount of 10,000 or 11,000 logon events on my DC alone, right? So there are a lot of problems when it comes to auditing with Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. The major problems are lack of filtering, lack of searchable capabilities. The logs fall under separate location. They do not fall under a single location. And of course, once something suspicious happens, once something malicious happens, once you find out that there's something fishy going on, you cannot set up a mitigation action. For example, if a user is, let's say, running a password spray script, right, that we just performed earlier, this is something malicious. This has to be alerted upon, and the user account has to be acted upon. Like the user account must be mitigated. The user account must be terminated, right? But Active Directory and Azure do not perform actions such as that. They are incapable of performing mitigation activities once a particular sensitive or a critical event or a security incident has been recorded. Right? But AD360 can help you with that because it looks into your hybrid Active Directory environment and also your data storage devices as well, like your Windows file servers, your NetApp, your EMC, the list simply goes on, right? So this is how it's going to work. If I head on to my browser and if I open up AD Audit Plus, this is the auditing component of AD360. This basically captures changes real time across your Active Directory environments and changes across your Azure Active Directory environments as well. Right? So as you can see, as soon as I log in, I have a bird's eye view of all changes that have happened. Here's a logon failure for an administrator account on my domain, right? If I head into reports, here you can find out all sensitive actions that have happened across your Active Directory infrastructure. So if there is a user logon failure, right, occurring within the same time, as you can see right here, it could be a potential password attack attempt. It could be a password spray attack, or it could be a brute force attack, right? Similarly, if I head down further, we've got something called group management, where you can find out users whenever they are added to security groups, right? Whenever backdoor users are added to administrative groups, users are added to exchange related groups, users are added to groups belonging to multiple domains. Right here, all you got to do is select the domain from the drop down, check the group membership, and if I head into user management right here, over here you can find out sensitive actions performed on your user accounts, like users whose passwords have been changed, users whose passwords have been reset, right? Changes such as that must be brought to notice. If I jump in here, you will see group policy management. If your group policy settings have been modified, have been changed, or your group policies have been deleted or created, changes such as that can be brought to notice. If security permissions on your user accounts, right? If an end user is granted a permission on a user account to basically, let's say, modify the user account or read the user account's properties, or let's say permission to reset passwords for all other users in Active Directory. Changes such as that, permissions such as that can be brought to notice. This works across Active Directory, across Azure as well. As you can see, we've got a lot in Azure. For example, users added to roles, users being granted privileged roles, users added to groups, users being added as an owner to a particular device, users being granted licenses within Azure Active Directory. Similarly, across your file servers, your data storage devices, if a file or folder permission is changed, if a file or folder permission is modified, if a file or folder is moved or deleted, changes such as that can be immediately brought to notice, and everything that is recorded within AD Audit Plus component of AD 360 can be configured into alerts as well, right? So if I head into configuration, we've got something called create alert profile right here, where you can create alerts that are granular to sensitive events that are happening in your domain, right? Which is something your native tools cannot do. For example, let me quickly show you something right here. Let's search for an alert called admin. Here we go. If your admin groups are modified, if there's a logon failure for administrative account, these are sensitive changes. These are something that have to be brought to notice, and AD 360 can do that for you. Right? You can set threshold-based alerts. For example, if there are more than 15 logon failures occurring within a minute, then alert me. If there are logon failures occurring post-business hours, throw me an alert, right? If there are group modifications happening only for certain specific admin groups, if users are added either directly or indirectly or nested or in a nested manner, changes such as that can be brought to notice, where you can notify an admin via email, via SMS, and you can execute a mitigation action. If you can recollect, this is not possible using the native tools. So if a user is potentially performing a password spray attack attempt, right? Changes such as that, logon failures can be tracked using the alerts, and you can execute a script to basically terminate the user's account or disable the user's account or shut down the user's system, right? There are a lot of things that you can look into the auditing component of AD 360. For example, we've got something called PowerShell auditing that will help you audit any malicious scripts that your end users are running in your organization. So if my user runs a password spray attack script, if my user runs any malicious script, like a script to add a backdoor user to an Active Directory group, or a script to enable a group policy setting, or a script that introduces malware into the registry, right, for persistent purposes, all of those changes can be brought to notice with reports, and every report is actionable because you can configure alerts as well. All right. So what we've essentially done today is we've secured the entire IAM process. We've secured the initial onboarding process. We've secured the offboarding process. We've secured the access changes that happen during the user's lifespan as well. All right. So is our IAM requirements, are our IAM standards checked? The answer to that question is yes. And we've done so with a balance between security and user convenience. We've ensured that our users are not annoyed, are not inconvenienced at any point in time, because user convenience is important, and user inconvenience could be a security risk for your organization as well. All right. Now, before I end this session, I would like to thank you all for joining in.